Welcome, everybody. Do we have quorum here? Let's see, we've got Glenn, Shauna. We do have quorum, but I guess I'd like to wait just a moment to see if Henry and David join us. How's everybody doing?
Good. Doing well, thank you.
There's Henry. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the Public Safety Committee for November 18th, 2021. And welcome, everybody. First item of business is any public comments. Did we receive any?
We did not.
Okay. Is there anybody on screen that I see Deanna is joining us? Okay, all right. Any changes to the agenda? And I think we have a pretty slim agenda, which is great. We might even end up with some time to spare. That wouldn't be a terrible thing. Could I get a motion on the minutes of October 21st, 2021? Shauna moves, Glenn seconds. Any questions or comments? Okay. I'll call the roll. Glenn?
Here.
Shauna?
Yes.
Henry?
Yes.
Okay. And the chair votes yes. I think that's unanimous. You know what? I'm going to save chair's report because that's where I'd like to have the discussion that I sent out an email about earlier. So why don't we go through the other reports? And first up is county administration. And I see Deanna, you're with us.
Sam, how are you today?
It's excellent.
Good. Thanksgiving week next week, and so I hope that everyone will take time to rejuvenate and relax and spend time with the people that you care about. So, but in terms of county administrator's report, we are in the process of finalizing the CJC project director search. We hope to be able to share an announcement shortly. We also just trying to do things in concert with the city of Ithaca. We did a walkthrough this week of the mental health building and the offices. We're going to be able to have their own create their own distinct identity within the mental health space. Dominic and I are working, or actually really Dominic is going to be working on the branding and getting some local murals, different things of that nature, and having them be able to again build and establish the identity within the CJC within that space. We also launched the alternative response for wraparound services with community partners this week. So we invited several partners, including Bureau, OAR, Reach Medical, a lot of folks who are the sheriff's office had representation, IPD was invited, a lot of different folks were invited again from a partner perspective to say, this is what this plan means at this time. And we will be going out to continue to build partnerships around that space. We also invited Cayuga Medical System as well, because they are interested in partnering on this work. So the next steps in that process will be to share the information that we received amongst collaborators, and then we'll continue to, we're going to schedule a meeting in the next month to walk through the recommendations specifically and figure out how we want to break into working groups around that information. I'd also like to thank NAMI for their participation as well. They were very thoughtful in addition to Family and Children's Services in many of their responses. And I also just like to give a special shout out to Joanne from the Sheriff's Office. She was actually attended 2 sessions because she was very interested in the work and provided great and valuable feedback, and was able to talk about her experience working in mental health, in addition to having Harmony Ayers as their Freelander there from the mental health department. So that was a good conversation this week. We also just left, we met with the Sheriff's Office this morning to continue our discussion. I believe this is our 3rd meeting on the pilot program for non-emergency calls. We like to thank the legislature for approving the funding. And so we will move ahead with that as well. And so there are lots of good things that are happening with the plans. And if we think about the totality of it, the Common Council and the legislature approved a little more than $1 million for funding for reimagining public safety. And we look forward to making sure that we are accountable with those funds and put them to good use, and also continue to do the reporting back on that work. And so lots of good things that are happening. And then in addition to, we've also started looking at some intercultural work on the community healing plan. One of the things that we heard from minoritized groups, specifically Black people, had mentioned that there was some work that needed to be done within the culture as conversations as we begin to look at working with law enforcement and also our other agencies as well. And so in December's timeframe, we'll be doing a session then around the community healing plan. So I'll stop there because there are lots of things that we could be talking about. But before I finish, we strongly encourage people to go to the website, create an account, engage in the plans that are there. We can't say it enough, in terms of the work. And so we're grateful for your participation, and we look forward to many more plans and opportunities for engagement in the future.
Thank you, Deanna. And I would certainly note there's a robust discussion taking place on the site. It is really worth going and taking a look, particularly at the ideas page.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for all your work on that. And before I go further, I remember I wanted to mention to committee members that the monthly report on 911 calls, emergency calls, came separately together with a budget transfer. And you should have gotten that by an email. Did that come from you, Brittany?
Yes, it did.
Yes. So just check your email if you haven't seen that part of the agenda. Next up is the Sheriff's Department. And welcome. Oh, Henry, you have a question, comment?
Yes, for Deanna. I know that Frank Cooper testified in front of the HSS committee on Monday, talking about the dearth of mental health workers. Have you been in contact with him about the dearth and everything else? Well,
yes, but not in that context. So I'm aware of it in that there's a shortage of a lot of professions. And so I'm aware of what is happening. But if you're speaking in the context of reimagining public safety, is that what you're asking in terms of the need for support for there? I think that's what you mean.
Right.
Yes. So I work with Harmony primarily, and so I'm aware of their challenges with mobile crisis unit and the various things that they're doing. But I've also worked with them on partnering on the CIT grant, with actually Jen did as well, because actually Jen brought it to us. And so we work together quite a bit, I would say, on projects and things. In addition to that work, Harmony and thinking about social work and mental health professionals is going to be an integral part of the alternative response, in that we don't know exactly what that will look like. And so she has been extremely helpful in helping us think about what currently exists, what do we need to have that doesn't exist, and and some of those things could be community outreach workers, or it could be something different. We don't know exactly what that will be, but all of those things and positions will be on the table in addition to our armed response.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Deanna? And I see that Amy has joined us. Hi, Amy, welcome. Is there anything you had for the Public Safety Committee?
I don't. I'm sure Deanna has filled you all in, so I will let you move ahead to the sheriff's report.
Yes, Deanna did a great job, and let's hear from Derek. Welcome.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I guess I'll just jump in on last week's chaotic event. I'd like to thank, since he's here, Mike and Jess and their crew at the 911 center. They were definitely very instrumental throughout the entire event, and we certainly couldn't have handled it to the level that we did without them and our other law enforcement partners, namely Cornell University Police and Cayuga Heights PD and the Ithaca Police Department. I think overall, the incident was handled extremely well, and I think it came out with positive results. I was informed there was possibly some concerns about certain things and way things were handled, but I haven't found any evidence of that myself. In particular, what prompted the article by the Ithaca Voice. But I know, Rich, you mentioned some communication issues, or not issues, but wanted me to speak to that topic in particular. Yeah, to answer.
We can talk about it now or have the general discussion at the end.
Okay, no, whatever you want, that's fine. Yeah, I don't have really anything else to report. I mean, as you obviously know, my time recently was tied up with that and some other things. So you have my report, and I'd rather just answer questions if you have any.
I do have a question. The officer who was hurt in the incident with the car at the base of Route 13 Hill, how's that deputy doing?
Yeah, he's doing fine. He's actually back to work now. He had a little bit of time off, not too extensive, but yeah, he's back to work full duty. Thank you, Frank.
Okay, Henry.
Yes, thank you, Derek. I got a question about the COVID positives in the jail. I assume that number is only for the inmates, the 8.
Yeah, I don't believe we have any currently. Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, but
No, we don't. There's no current cases of COVID in the jail. Yes, that number does reflect the inmates.
Yeah,
Right.
I think, the delay in the reports coming to you, with the scheduling of the meeting and when we prepare the reports. Yeah, we did have a rash of it, but we were able to get through that, and we have had no positive tests for quite some time now.
And we were able to increase the number of incarcerated persons who were vaccinated by nearly, an additional 20%.
Okay, are you able to isolate the 8 people pretty easily?
Yeah, due to this space we have in the jail with so few inmates now, one positive that comes out of that is we do have a lot more freedom in the jail to move people around. So we were able to do that. We are also discussing, which may be helpful in situations like this, with our centralized arraignment plan and all the work that's going to be done at Sorry, guys. I am at home. I do have a couple dogs. What was I saying before I was so
You're talking about centralized arraignment.
Yeah, for the centralized arraignment plan, we have some discussions being had about taking our one large holding cell and dividing that up into 3 individual holding areas. So, when this happens, or if it happens again in the future or continues on, that'll give us more opportunities to separate people as well.
I would just say, I would just wanted to add and say, while we were able to do it, I by no means would categorize it as being easy. Luckily, Captain Bunce and the sergeants have it kind of down to a science, being able to move people around in different blocks, and it did result in some boarding out. And I think the increase in COVID positives, in my opinion, somewhat correlated with us not having the ability to have rapid testing either. We were really relying on rapid tests when people were coming in to the jail to help quickly house them and categorize whether they needed to be isolated or quarantined, or they could go in general population. We now have access to rapid testing again. So I think that's going to continue to help us.
Okay, yeah, and that was what I was leading to. I was leading to board outs. But you anticipated my question, so thank you.
And are the 5 board outs, are those women?
Most likely, yeah.
Yeah, the majority are female inmates. There is one that we had to board out just because there was believed to going to be an issue with another person that was housed in our jail as well.
Okay, Shauna.
Yeah, I just wanted to commend you on your response last week. It seemed like it was ever changing, and having children in 3 different schools, it was nice to see the location of the scene. I was wondering, as far as tools go, I know that many of us received updates via Swift 911. Are there any other tools that you think would be helpful in getting the word out to community members? Because there were many of my constituents that had written in and didn't know if there were updates. Quite honestly, ICSD was not doing a great job of keeping parents aware of what was going on in the schools. And I didn't know if there was some type of system that pushes notifications to people that might be in the area.
Shauna, that's the discussion I was going to have at the end. But since you jumped in, why don't we do it now? That, I sent out an email on this. I don't know if you had a chance to see that, but
Yeah,
Sheriff, why don't you go, and Dominic, I know you have some views you wanted to share, and Michael, I'd love to hear you chime in too. And
yeah.
anyone else.
Swift 911 is good for a lot of things. I mean, some issues we've had with it consistently is a low character account. It allows you to put in, so the messaging ends up being extremely brief. And you have to kind of pick and choose what you're saying and what you're not. I actually had a meeting with Mike, I think it was yesterday, Mike, or maybe it was 2 days ago, and hospital staff as well. And I know Mike's done a lot of work, I believe with Dominic as well, with this rave system, I believe it's called. I got to learn about it a little bit from Mike the other day during our meeting, and I'll let him continue talking about it because he knows much more on it than I do. But that seems like a tool that would be very helpful and may make it easier on all of us.
Dominic?
Yeah, I wanted to share that I have heard myriad concerns from the community in terms of communication, have prepped some notes of some thinking, and wanted to walk through some of the stuff that Mike and I and Lisa, Amy and I have talked about since the event. I think there's no doubt that the individuals who were at the incident command were doing obviously their best. I don't think there was critique to the individuals sort of doing the work to respond to it. I think the critiques that I've heard, and that from a communications perspective, I've been thinking about a lot since the event, was a mix of the consistency and what those messages ended up looking like and through what platforms they went out. So Shauna, I think your question is a good one of, you know, what can we do to make sure people are more aware? Unfortunately, as we've talked about many times in these meetings and other meetings, there's not a lot of local press to sort of get things out quickly. So one of the things that when we have the rave system implemented, Mike and I have been talking about is really marketing that widely, even more widely to the community. We have thousands of people on there, but we know we have 100,000 residents in Tompkins County. So we know we can really set good goals and push that further. I think people, one of the first concerns that came to me from people as the shooting happened was families were concerned that they were connected perhaps to the threats made at the high school earlier that day, and maybe even to the Cornell incident. I think I often do this myself, but I think we take for granted that that we know a lot of information of what's going on, but the sort of layperson who has maybe one social media account and they're seeing things, or they're getting forwarded text messages or other things from people, don't have that full 360 picture. So one thing I think in the future, or maybe as a follow-up communication, is sort of clarifying, hey, these things weren't connected, because people were worried that there was a shooting inside the school. People also don't understand what things like shelter in place or lockdown means. And I heard some people, using the words lockdown internally at the school district or otherwise, whereas it was clearly a shelter in place type event. So I think there was some confusion on that, where we can educate the community on what those things look like. I've talked with Mike about that as well. And then on the Swift, yeah, go ahead.
If you could just take a moment, because we are broadcasting, could you explain the difference?
Between lockdown and shelter in place?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I am going to turn to Derek and Jen or Mike to sort of clarify that a little bit further. I can, give a cursory understanding, but I think that they'd be able to speak from more authority on that.
Yeah, I mean, shelter in place in its simplest terms is securing the thing securing the building and not letting outside people come into the building. What I understand is, and I've only heard this third hand, that perhaps one school in particular during this incident treated it more like an active shooter event, where they had people more secured inside than maybe they necessarily needed to be for the event. But, I got to add, I mean, the schools, they train on this. They at the end of the day, this is their decision on how they handle things. Sure, we can educate them, but I don't feel like this is necessarily a result of how things are messaged or whatever. The sheriff's office has spent a great deal of time working with schools in handling active shooters and different types of events. And at the end of the day, it's their policies that dictate how they respond to these incidences. Well, yeah, I'm not against educating them further, and maybe we have to use less legalese terms when we put out these messages. That could help resolve some of these problems. But again, I'm hearing this third hand. I haven't heard from anybody at the school or any community members myself at all. So
I suspect it's also because Cornell had the lockdown the weekend before.
Right.
And so people just assumed it was the same message.
yeah, very well could be. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, Henry. I had heard that. The two other things I wanted to mention really briefly was I think people don't quite understand the process of the SWIFT notifications in the community earlier. And I'll leave that sort of breakdown to emergency response to explain, but it shifted from a 5-mile radius, which is really big, to a 1-mile radius relatively quickly. I think that caught people off guard as to what that meant. And so one of the things we've talked about is that character limit that Derek mentioned. Our plan is to, when we switch to Rave communication instead of Swift, is to actually send links through those text messages so that people have a place to click and they can see all details about what communications have gone out around an incident. So it's not limited to those characters, or they can see clearly sort of an archive of what's happened in the past. We've run into that archiving issue a lot where, there's things that have happened in the city and maybe a notification has been sent to a small sort of geofence rather than the whole city. And people don't know where to find those different things. So there might be screenshots sent around or emails forwarded, but different people get different notifications. So I think there was some concern about, well, a 5-mile radius, that's the whole county. And then it was switched to the 1-mile radius and people were confused as to that. The other thing I'll add as a follow-up is, and I've been working with emergency response on this, we're going to be planning to pull together different public information officer type roles from internally at the county and at our community partners, including law enforcement, together on a more regular basis. That sort of stopped during COVID for many different reasons, but I think having that group meeting together to sort of talk through these communications challenges in an emergency response way would be valuable. So those are some of my initial thoughts and the things we're working on, and I'll pipe in later as things come up as well.
Michael?
Good afternoon, everybody. I think that the sheriff and Dominic really covered most of it. I think they did a really good job at it. We are looking to move to a new platform called Rave. Just to give you some background, first and foremost, we are preparing a very brief presentation for the Public Safety Committee. We weren't prepared to do that today because it has happened kind of quickly, but Rave purchased Swift 911. And they're asking their customers to migrate over to that platform. Rave is a fantastic platform. Cornell uses it, CMC uses it, a lot of schools, there's a lot of organizations use it. One really unique feature about Rave that I personally like is if you're a subscriber, and using the example the other day where we created these radiuses, say the 1-mile radius, if you're outside that radius when the message first went out and then you drove into that radius, you would get a message. And I think that that's a really nice benefit because, people don't necessarily know when we do those type of messaging that if they're just on the outside, they may not even know that there's an incident, but now they could just happen into it. So we believe that that's going to be a great resource to us moving forward. And then, of course, another function of Rave and that Dominic touched on was this ability to have the messages from Rave populate into like a blog style page so that we can be a little bit more detailed. Crisis communication is different than other forms of communication. And sometimes you don't have the ability to push out a lot of information, but as the event is unfolding, if you can get the crisis message out just to warn people and to ask them to take immediate action, we can now use this background page to provide more detail that comes out of the command post that people can go and look at and say, oh, okay, I understand now what's going on. So I think, just besides moving to the Rave platform, I think how we're looking to really improve our crisis communication with working with our law enforcement leaders and with Dominic and his team and the Doer team I think that a lot of good has come out of this incident because now we are talking, not that that talking wasn't happening before, but certainly this was unique in a lot of ways. And we're able to capitalize on that and to create a better system.
Jessica, did you have anything you wanted to share? Okay.
No, I think when they were talking about the school districts and the difference between lockdown and shelter in place, some of it depends on the school district. I know they've tried to work towards standardizing that terminology. In some cases that hasn't happened. So it might be different for different school districts. So kind of the difference between Cornell's lockdown or lockout versus a shelter in place. That was my only comment.
Okay. I was curious about the coordination because I was getting messages through Swift 911 and Cornell. And so I was getting barraged with messages, which was fine, but it led me to wonder what kind of coordination is taking place. And
Yeah, I mean,
whoever can answer that.
it was a multi-agency response and a multi-agency command post. So there was myself there as well as the chief from Ithaca Police, chief from Cayuga Heights, and officials from Cornell University. So obviously, being a county incident, I put out my media releases, and Cornell was there with me, and all the chiefs were reviewing the media releases, making decisions on them, changes as needed fit, and then doing their own thing. So I covered the law enforcement response outside of Cornell University, but it's quite often different. I mean, they got different reporting policies and standards and needs when it comes to students and what they're required to do. So yeah, they took what I had and then they took it and did their own alerts as well for the Cornell University campus.
And just to springboard off that a bit, I was in the 911 center for those few hours, and I thought the communication between the command post and the 911 center was stellar. I mean, there were several times where the undersheriff was calling up and giving us very specific instructions on the language for the Swift 911 broadcast. And I know we certainly appreciated that. It made our job a lot easier. And I personally appreciated just that communication between the command post and the 911 center, because I have been in environments where that wouldn't typically happen. And it was happening on a regular basis during this event. And I just think that the leadership in the command post made sure that happened. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware. I think that they did a great job.
Yes, and please, I wanted us to have this conversation, but it wasn't out of any criticism. I was impressed. But certainly, as Dominic has indicated, we can learn from this and we can go forward. One thing that I think we could probably try to do is to get more people signed up to get these alerts, right? If there is something the legislators could do, perhaps as announcements at our meetings or something further, we should think about that. And I'm sure we would be willing to help. The closer we can get to everybody being signed up, the better. Henry?
When is Swift changing over to Rave?
We're looking at a February 1 rollout. That's the date that Rave would like us to do it. But I think that if we need to move it back, we might have to, but I really am trying to keep up with that date. Again, next month, I'd really like to be able to come back and give an overview of Rave to the committee, so that you're well versed in what we're doing and why we're doing it. But February 1st is the date that we're looking at right now. And we feel that that would be a good opportunity. Dominic and I have talked about this at length about what we can do to really engage the community and how we can get it out there. Like, for example, cards and backpacks that go home with kids. I mean, really, really pushing Rave. It gives us an opportunity to sort of reinvent how we're doing this community notification.
And yes, Michael, yes, please. Please, we can plan on that for our next meeting.
Thank you.
Shauna?
I was wondering if this was included in next year's budget, or if there was allocated funds for it already.
That's a great question. It's actually not. It's part of our current budget through the Swift 911 package. So there's no increase for us to move to the Rave platform. So what's nice is we're getting an enhanced product for no additional cost. But that's a great question.
Do you anticipate there being transitional costs in your department?
I do not, no, because no, not at all. They'll handle all the back end work that needs to be done as far as moving the lists over and all the people that are on the Rave system. And as far as the public is concerned, and although we're going to do, I hope, a fantastic job at advertising it, just because it's such a great product, they really won't notice much of a difference other than how we decide to use it and really enhance the tool and how we're using that enhanced tool. But as far as getting notifications, the residents won't, our community won't have to do anything additional other than hopefully getting more people to sign up. But Rave will handle everything else.
All right, Deanna.
I just answered my question because I was going to say, just as a newer community member, I signed up for it, and so sometimes you'll be with somebody and you'll get an alert, and then they said they signed up for Rave and they may not get an alert. So I was just wondering, with them moving to the new system, like when I'm just saying, speaking just as a newbie here, when I signed up, it asked me about my preferences. When you have an incident like this, where it's impacting the entire community in this way, is there something that kind of overrides that, or is it still by what you have picked? Does that make sense? Because I would want to know, even if I hadn't signed up, what's happening.
That's a
so
great, yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to have to research that because not with Swift 911 that I know of, but Rave might have an override. But I will definitely find out, Deanna. That's a great question.
Sure.
You know the answer, Jess?
There is a life safety override.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you.
Sure. And I know you have to curate your messages, based upon whatever the response is. And I'm just thinking about signing up and staying alert, because then also all of us being in public roles, family and friends, people, they know by proximity, they will assume, just like with COVID response, they'll ask you lots of questions. And so that was really more to hear you guys say it out loud to the public as well. So people will be.
Absolutely. And we want to make sure the public is aware that since we're moving to the Rave platform, if they're familiar with it at CMC or they're familiar with it at Cornell, that it's a unique system. And that if they're signed up at one of those other two locations, that they would still need to sign up for ours if they're not currently a subscriber to Swift 911. We want to make sure that we make that messaging very clear. And I'm really going to rely on Dominic to help me with that messaging.
Henry.
How many people are on Swift on Swift?
Jess, do you know off the top of your head?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can look it up.
Yeah, we can get right back to you with that.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anything further on the communication aspect? I would note 5 years ago, this wasn't possible at all. This is a really pretty important development that we've seen with these notification systems. It's easy to say it can be better, but we didn't have it. So good. Why don't we turn to the question of what does the incident last week, what does it mean, if anything? Is it an isolated incident? It does seem like there have been reports over the last several months of gunfire and shots. And I wanted us to have a discussion of that, whether this is a trend or this is an isolated incident. I know Lance has some views and indicated there have been a series of arrests in the last few weeks that probably are related to at least some of what's been going on. But I'd sure like to get your viewpoints. And whoever would like to chime in, please. Lance, why don't I call on you since you responded? And I know you have something to share.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. Can everyone hear me okay? I've got a new microphone hooked in. I want to make sure it's working correctly. Okay. Yeah, no, I sent an email in response to yours. I think other people may have seen it. I think to me, I mean, we've had obviously I'm aware of all the shooting reports, but to me, what those are, the majority of those seem related. That's why I call them a discrete set of events. They're not, to me, indicative of a broader crime wave in terms of large numbers of people or trends, more and more people committing crimes, but rather it seems we have two small discrete groups of people who have been interacting with each other. They're in conflict. Some of it seems personal. There may be other things going on. I know in the defense community, I suspect some in the police, are the biases or feelings we, based on, what we deal with, suspect there may be other issues in addition to personal conflict going on there. But it seems most of that seems confined to a small discrete group of people. And we've had this in the past, but it just doesn't carry on quite the same. I think one of the problems the police, from my perspective, have in trying to address this is, as I noted, it's difficult. They may or may not have a sense of who these actors are, but that's not enough. They're trying to track them. Until they get hard evidence or until an incident happens, with the Cayuga Heights incident, where they actually catch them, can kind of, in process, it's probably frustrating to the community, but it takes a while to develop and arrest people while they're carrying on. But we shouldn't mistake that for a broader trend throughout the community, I guess is what I was trying to emphasize.
Derek, do you have a view on this, or?
Well, if Lance has information that this is just a handful of people that we don't know who they are, but he does, I'd like to know who they are. No, maybe he's got a client list he can share.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, all I have to say, this isn't just a Tompkins County problem. This type of crime is escalating across the nation, and I don't feel this is just a very small group of people, and I base that on the fact that we have made numerous arrests for gun-related crimes between my agency and Ithaca Police as well, and they don't seem to be lessening up at all by any stretch of the imagination. And if we've seen things like this happen in our community before, I can tell you that I've obviously been blind to it, because I think this is a pretty bad rash, and it's pretty violent and it's pretty extensive. I have not seen anything in our community that ever has risen to this level since I've been in law enforcement here, which goes back to 2001. I can't speak to prior to that, but I wasn't seeing it in my previous jurisdiction of employment either. And what we're seeing with a lot of these, yes, some of them go unsolved, but the people that we are apprehending and that we do have information that are possibly involved, this is drug activity and gang-like behavior. This is not for a lack of social services that are causing these, in my opinion. This is something quite different. We could all speculate and probably have different opinions what's causing this, but we've seen what's happened to law enforcement across the nation for the last year and a half, and we also have seen these spikes in crime as well. And it's hard for me to explain this as anything other than the two having something to do with each other. I don't know. That's my opinion, and I'm not going to push it on anybody else, but that's where I think we are.
But let me clarify a little bit, because I may not have been clear. I agree. I think people suspect drug activity as part of this, but much of this seems to be related to, from the statements that some of the people arrested have given, identifying what's going on, that there are, and you see that IPD, apparently their statements, they feel much of what's going on in their community in the city is focused on these two groups, that there are a couple of discrete groups in conflict. I agree. There's personal conflicts. I would not be surprised that, and I'm probably suspicious, drug activity, as the sheriff feels, is behind this, but my sense of what I've seen, that explains a large chunk of what we're seeing. In terms of the shooting incidents.
So you'd say it's a handful of people repeatedly fighting with each other?
I think a number of the shooting is, we've had some other, we've had about 8 people, I think, with that have picked up gun charges in the last few weeks in the county, counting city and county charges. My suspicions, and 1, 2, 3, let's say about half of those may be unrelated, and those seem to be, some of them are just possession, they're found with guns. The other ones seem to be tied in some way or another to this rash of shooting incidents we've had.
Okay, all right, Matt.
Great. Can you hear me okay? I got a new
Yep.
webcam. Awesome. Well, I think that some of the incidents are related to this small group, and there are 2 distinct factions. I don't know if I would call them gangs, but they are certainly engaged in drug activity and are shooting at each other. That is the source of a lot of this, but it's not all of it. I think that Derek is also right that there is a rise in this level of this type of crime. There are, quite a few other gun-related charges and some shots fired charges that are or incidents that are not related to these 2 groups who are feuding with each other. We have, in the last few weeks, gotten several cases in to my office, which means that there have been arrests made. And I am personally handling those cases. I did a preliminary hearing on Monday in Cuyahoga Heights Court that related to one of the individuals who was charged with what happened last Tuesday. So I'm treating those as top priority and trying to move them through the judicial system as quickly as I can. So I think that there's a lot of factors that come into play, but these are not crimes of poverty, as Derek said. These are drug related. They're gang-like activity related crimes.
Yeah, and if I can clarify, Matt, you just said it right at the end there. I'm not saying this is gang involvement, such as Bloods versus the Crips or something like that. I'm saying it's gang-like activity. It's
I agree.
Drugs and shootouts.
But we are seeing individuals come into Tompkins County from Elmira, from Utica, from Rochester, and those are just 3 examples of, in the last few weeks, individuals who have been arrested for gun-related offenses. All have come from those areas. So it's a combination of local people, but also branching out into other areas, and the connections go out across the state.
Yep, absolutely.
It seems like a not out of the ballpark assumption that if people are coming from Elmira or Utica and engaging in gunfire here, it could well be drug related. Seems like a pretty obvious assumption. Whether it's true or not, I guess we need to figure out. But, okay. Anybody else? Part of the reason I wanted this conversation to happen is I've been seeing and hearing some comments that I believe are relating these incidents to our efforts in reimagining public safety, which I think is a really unfortunate connection and one we need to combat. But if you read the comments on the reimagining webpage, there are some people suggesting that because we're examining our policing systems from the reimagining standpoint, this has somehow encouraged this kind of behavior. And I just don't think that's true at all. But I'd love to hear a comment from anybody here. Deanna, I'm sure you have an opinion, but from anybody.
I think, looking at who some of the actors are and stuff, I don't think there's any real connection you can make between the two. I know because they're happening, people may draw that assumption, but there's no evidence to support that, other than people may want to, believe that. I think these two groups of actors are. This was probably going on before, the reimagining work, really became public and known, and it's in my view completely unrelated to it.
I think it is completely unrelated, but the public perception is dangerous. I believe in that it can undermine the work we're doing. Henry.
Yes, I mean, I think that this issue is more of a debate between, the mayor of Ithaca and his police department. There was a story in the Ithaca Times recently about the debate they're having. And I think that reimagining public safety is a very easy dog to kick or whatever in terms of this. I don't believe that it has any connection, but people are gonna make the spurious connection that, oh, since crime is going up and you're reimagining public safety, the two must be related. And I don't think they are at all either.
I think that expression, an easy dog to kick, is a good one in this instance. Dominic.
Yeah, I certainly agree with both of what they said, especially what Lance said there. And I would argue that it's incumbent upon all of us to get as many voices as we can into reimagining. I think there are, from what I can tell on the website and social media and other conversations, there's a small group of people who are really agitating types of critiques rather than constructive ideas. And what I've heard from this group throughout the process of reimagining is that we're really interested in constructive ideas that can help us do things differently. And so however we can help encourage people who bring ideas to us to share those constructive ideas with others, get more on the website. We're hosting some forums, thanks to Sheriff Osborne and Harmony from our teams, and John from the Ithaca Police Department. We'll have one on the 30th about looking at how our current response systems work and what alternative responses are out there and how we're sort of asking people for opinions about those. But yeah, I think we see a lot more vitriol from people rather than constructive ideas. So I would just challenge us all to sort of encourage those people we know who have those ideas to share them in those public forums, so they can sort of crowd out some of the things that just aren't related to what we're asking from the community. We try really hard to be articulate about what it is we're seeking from people. And I'm always open to feedback too. I do a lot of the writing for these things. So any feedback that anyone here has on how we're putting that out, I am more than open to that anytime.
Thank you, Dominic. Shauna.
Yeah, I've received a lot of feedback in regards to the people that were actually arrested during this and them getting out on bail, and people blaming that on bail reform. And I was actually curious as to if prior to bail reform, if they would have been released.
I can, and I'll let Matt answer after me, but bail reform doesn't affect these. What bail reform did, just to summarize, is it basically made a lot of nonviolent crimes non-bail eligible. Violent crimes like these shooting incidents or the weapons possession charges, they're still bail eligible, as witnessed by the fact that a judge set bail and they made that bail. So bail reform didn't affect that. These crimes for which they're charged are still bail eligible. Matt's office makes bail requests and arguments, and the judges set bail as they think is appropriate. Most of the people I think charged have not made their bail. A couple have, to my knowledge. But that's, I mean, before bail reform, you would have had the same thing occurring. Matt's office would have requested bail. The defense attorney would have made a bail argument. The judge would, in all likelihood, set bail. And then if they make the bail, they make the bail. If they don't, they don't.
Matt, you have something to add?
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Thank you. I think, bail, one of the greatest misconceptions about bail is that it is in New York State intended to, or you can consider the issue of public safety or threat to the community when it comes to setting bail. And that is not a factor that the judges can consider. So the only real issues that the judge is considering is whether the person is a flight risk. Is he going to come or she going to come back to court when directed? And people who have ties to the community, for example, are less likely to flee, or when you're looking at them in a short period of time during an arraignment, judges, I think, have decided that they're less of a flight risk. That being said, all of these shots, possession of a gun, possession of a loaded gun, things like that, those are not things that were affected by the bail reform. They were eligible for bail, and they are still eligible for bail to be set. I think probably in general, bails that have been set since bail reform are lower because there has been an emphasis on imposing the least restrictive means in order to get the individual to return to court. And it's very frustrating for people in the community to see someone who was charged with possessing a loaded gun and where bail is set at $4,000 and the person posts it the next day. That's frustrating for people because the community doesn't really understand that bail is not punitive in nature. It's not supposed to penalize the person before they have their day in court or their trial. And that kind of monetary bail certainly has all kinds of issues relating to financial means. Someone who has a lot of money can write a check for $4,000 in 5 minutes, and someone who doesn't have any money is being punished for the same conduct because they don't have any financial means. So I think bail reform was intended to mitigate a lot of those disparities, financial disparities that often relate back to racial inequities. But that's a long-standing conversation in New York State. And I think my understanding is New York is the only state where judges are not allowed to consider the issue of threat to the community when setting bail. So that's going to be an issue going forward as long as that's the case.
Thank you, Matt. Glenn?
Can we hear what Derek has to say as well as Dan Cornell?
Sure.
I'm just, to maybe flip this around for a second here. If police reform or reimagination, bail reform, and things of that nature are not what we feel is causing this increase in violent behavior, what do people think is? I guess that's what I'd like to know.
I have some opinions there, but Dan, jump in.
I sort of, pardon me, I agree with Derek's question. I have the same question. I believe that there's been a spike in violent crime in the city. I've been here since 1999. I've never seen anything like it. I think it's spiked even more since, not so much reimagining, but since I don't think reimagining is the issue. I think the reduction in police officers on the street, that is a result of everything that's been going on for the last 2 years, has an impact. There's less proactive policing going on. It's more reactive. There are fewer investigators. There's fewer officers on the street. There are officers getting mandated to work overtime consistently. I don't think that we should change what we're doing with the reimagining process, but I think we need to look at police staffing levels as part of that if we want to enhance community safety.
I think that's a good point. And I guess I'll jump in and say, I don't think what we're doing with reimagining public safety is a cause of what has been going on with gunfire. However, certainly the impacts on morale within the police agencies is an issue. And I think our messaging, you know, and not just the county, but at the city level too, we haven't done the best job we could in explaining what this is about. And I think we've created some real anxiety within the ranks of the police officers, and that's truly unfortunate. But if you look at what reimagining is intended to do of increasing trust in the community, that helps policemen and women. That what you hope that when somebody has a problem, they will call emergency responders for help. And when the emergency responders show up, that the people there help them try to figure out what went wrong and what's going wrong and address it. And that I see as the core of what reimagining is intended to do. How we get there, I think we're in an environment with the pandemic and certainly what happened in Minnesota and all of the fallout since then, it's become harder and harder to have conversations on these issues. And there's been far more polarization. I think our national government is in a situation where it's difficult to have those kinds of conversations. And a lot of that spills down to the local level, unfortunately, because I think we are doing some good things here. But again, we get judged on what's happening on the streets of Minnesota. And Derek.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what you said, Rich. I mean, I think you're on so many levels. I think reimagination and seeking better ways to respond and improve our police forces and all that, it's all great stuff. I'm a strong proponent of that. But unfortunately, just, you know, given the situation nationwide and how this unfolded, this came with a great deal of disparaging behavior too towards law enforcement. And we've seen the effects of that nationwide and locally. As we all know, sitting in this room, a great deal of my police force was lost during this process just due to that lack of morale in the types of things they were receiving by way of messaging and things of that nature. So I would hate to see the same as you for any good work and good intentions we have to be lost on some of that stuff that is portrayed the way it is. And it's really unfortunate because I agree. I think this has in some ways made us more polarized than ever. And that's the exact opposite of what we want to happen.
Henry.
Yes, I think that, you know, I know that, you know, Savante Myrick, when the pandemic first started and crime started going up, he said it was related to the pandemic. And I think that was in 2020. I also think that, yes, that maybe the rollout of the public safety did not have the intended consequences. It did not, it was not the best, let's put it that way. So I think that did have something to do with the number of officers that we have, but also in that same Ithaca Times article and other machinations, maybe Matt can talk about this, that other crimes have gone down. And so I think that, yes, the shootings and the stabbings, whatever, have gotten our attention, but other crimes have gone down, at least by analysis. So we can't just say that, oh yeah, reimagining public safety has caused this outbreak in crime. I think that it's a much more complicated issue than that. And that, you know, we need to look at all things before we make that connection that reimagining public safety has caused people to say, oh, well, they're reimagining public safety. Let me have a shootout. I don't think that's true.
Yeah, Dan.
I agree with you, Mr. Granison. I don't think there's a correlation between reimagining public safety and people deciding to discharge firearms in the streets. However, it has happened, and I think we need to explore why it's happening. I think it's potentially a misconception or a perception that there is less law enforcement intent in the community. I think it was Thomas Paine, I may be misquoting him, but there was a statement made that communities are as safe as they choose to be. And I think we need to make sure that we're making choices that let the public know as part of the reimagining process that public safety is a priority and that certain behaviors are not going to be accepted in the community. And, you know, when the people who commit these violent crimes and endanger the public are apprehended, that they be prosecuted and they be appropriately, you know, put through the criminal justice system. We can't allow this type of behavior to become commonplace in Tompkins County or the city of Ithaca. I mean, I believe that's our responsibility as public safety committee and public safety personnel. We need to continue with the reimagining process. We need to do a better job that communicating to the public that we do support police and law enforcement and public safety. It's not that there are limits to what we can do without police.
A very good point. Shauna?
Yeah, I definitely think that this conversation also goes back to people that are using substance. I mean, the fact that we've had the highest rate of overdose ever this year really speaks volumes in the United States. And I mean, we certainly here in Ithaca are not immune to that. You know, even this year, we've had 8 overdose in the jungle. Like that's a really high number. And I think even for people who have never struggled with mental health issues before, because of COVID, it's the one thing that that people are struggling with. And so, you know, I don't want to say COVID has caused all of our issues because we know that's not true, but it certainly has been the tipping point for many people.
I think that's a good point. And certainly tangled up with all of this is the encampments, which is a separate issue, sort of, but you strain resources, you make it far more difficult for emergency responders and service providers to get to some of the neediest people in our community who are likely involved in substance abuse disorder. So I think there's a connection there, but it's difficult to describe what it quite might quite be. Deanna.
I'll make this brief. I just always think about tracking the data and where the resources are going. So if I always think about what Executive Order 203 is, look at disproportionate minority contact. If we say that it's just because of looking at this, that's what this was, an exploration of that. I know that there was a level of vitriol that went through this. If we're going to do something,
speak up a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Yes. So I think about so I appreciate all the comments that I heard on here today. And so I just think it's important to just note that as I think about Executive Order 203 and I think about disproportionate minority contact, I think I agree in terms of, I don't think that reimagining public safety is the cause of crime. If you say that, that's assuming that is an underlying assumption that either minoritized groups are the exclusive cause of the crime or that minoritized groups don't want to be safe. And I don't think that any of those are true. And I don't think that also that they don't care about the safety of others. I'm just saying that's an underlying. So I'm saying that there are things that we want to do, but also thinking about the investment of resources. When I met with Derek and Jenna the last few times, it's about investing in this particularly the pilot program and thinking about it and thinking about how Road Patrol can have more time to do other things, you know, and to help people be safer. So when you really put your money where your mouth is, that's where the money went for reimagining public, a significant chunk of it. It is an investment in law enforcement to do things differently, and that will free up time for Road Patrol to do things that keep people safe that we may require an armed response. And so I want to unpack the logic of this whole thing as I think about this, right? Because when I think about the over $1.2 million, we think about the alternative response, so we're thinking about the community investment. It is in the health and human services arena, you know, or it is in law enforcement. It will help us all think about what this means for us. And so I don't have any additional comment, but as we think about it, if we are thinking about safety for the community, I think I just cautious in that it's such a blanket umbrella around it. Does that make sense? Because it is complicated, it is complex. And I think, again, binary choices, law enforcement are people who may be who are members of the community want to be safe. People of color want to be safe who are members of the community. They're all the same thing and they all want the same thing. How we get there, yes. And so I want to be careful, or I want to be conscious of as we think about things in terms of race, community, those different constructs that we are working towards, that we don't make binary statements around these things. Are there things we need to do differently to improve and enhance our working reimagining? Yes, that's why we are all involved. One of the things that I said to Derek today in our meeting was, I said, I hope that we go together as we think about, we come forward with different suggestions and recommendations, because it's all of our responsibility. I don't own the reimagining process. I just happened to move from Wichita and they were like, you're good at managing projects, you get this, and you do equity work. So, okay, so I'm happy to stand up and lead in that way. And so I think it's all of our responsibility to help with the messaging of that, right? In terms of how we think about reading. So if we do think about these things that Richie said, it's all of our responsibility to combat that, and what that looks like. And so just like I stand up for safety for everyone.
Thank you. Dan, did you have something?
I just wanted to say, I agree with everything that's being said. I think if we don't really know the answer to why violence is escalating, but I think if we automatically preclude the possibility of the executive order as factoring into that, then we may be missing something. I'd also like, once the CJC gets up and running, to maybe we can track disproportionate minority victimization as part of these violent crimes. I think we should look at who's suffering the impact when these events occur in the community. What is the demographics of the people who are being harmed the most by our policies and by our decision making?
Good point. There was a second reason I wanted to raise this issue, and that is because we are, frankly, a state and a national leader in terms of our alternatives to incarceration. And I think we've done something really, really important here, and we can be a model for other communities. Our jail population is low, as we all know, but it's because we've invested in a really comprehensive and collaborative system of alternatives and worked across all of the different interest groups to try to do criminal justice in a different way. It really only makes sense if our crime level is not rising. And if our crime level is rising, our argument for why we're doing something better is just not as strong. And that makes me really nervous, because we could give away a lot of gains here. And I don't want to do that. I was wondering if anybody has comment on that aspect. Yeah, Sheriff, jump in.
Yeah, Rich, I think alternatives are a great thing, and I think the county's done an excellent job in that front. And I don't think that really necessarily has anything to do with our crime increase locally. But with that said, with bail reform and what Matt mentioned, removing that judge's discretion in certain situations to set bail at a reasonable amount, I'm not going to lie, when we extended that amount of resources that we did last week and captured the people involved in a very violent situation in the city of Ithaca, I would have liked to have seen them secured in jail a little bit longer, to be honest with you. And it was very disheartening to see them released, and at least one of them back out on the street before we even had the report finished. So yeah, I don't think it's the alternatives that are an issue here. I think those are great, and people should have an opportunity to participate in them. We can always go backwards if somebody goes through those processes and they're not successful in that program, and look at something different. But I wouldn't change, our strategy as far as alternatives go.
Certainly, if there's a recommendation of this group to the legislature on making a request to New York State on expanding beyond likelihood of return to court to a public safety issue, however tailored or ground to set bail or to hold somebody, I think that's something that the legislature should listen to and at least consider.
Rich, I'll follow up with you just to give you heads notice on that, because that's, I think, is a wrong-headed approach. we're not the only state in the country. We're one of a few. But history shows that that's become an excuse for incarceration, particularly of minorities in the past. They're considered a public safety. That becomes one of these catch-alls. So that's something you need to look at very carefully. I'll try to send you all some information on that, but that, I understand the sentiment there, but that becomes one of these, it has historically been a catch-all for, well, this person's a threat to the community, which goes undefined. And if you look at a lot of the historical data, the people who have suffered from that the most tend to be people of color and poor. Yeah, it's a class-based issue and a race-based issue in many parts of the country. So I'll send you some data on that. I just don't want us to rush into that.
I agree, and I understand the issues that have arisen from that. That's why I use the term well-tailored, that you have to be really careful about it. But if there's nothing, if it's just likelihood to return to court, then the whole issue Matt raised, that people with money don't worry about bail, and they can be really dangerous.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I can tell you, having practiced in the courts, judges here in New York aren't allowed to explicitly consider that. They always find ways to consider that in their factors of are they can I release them in the community? So it gets worked in. Matt's correct. They can't explicitly consider that, but it's not completely ignored either. To be frank,
should it be done in an explicit manner rather than judges sort of shaving around the edges, maybe? But further discussion. I'd love to look at the data you have. Yeah, Jen.
Thank you. No, I agree with Derek that I don't think the alternatives to incarceration are contributing to the rise in crime locally here. But one thing that has been bugging me for a long time, actually, I've been in this position almost 3 years now, and I think I've missed maybe one public safety committee meeting and sat on several other committee meetings, is I think that an equal amount of effort needs to be put into victim services and educating the public so that they don't become victims. I could think of maybe less than a handful of times where we've actually spent time talking about the victims of crimes and how we could help them, what services we could provide them, what services can we provide the community so that they don't become victims. And specifically being in public safety and law enforcement, this gets particularly frustrating because that's who we're dealing with every day. We see the victims of a crime every day. So when we simply just talk about alternatives to incarcerations, what services we could provide to people who are offending and victimizing community members, it could get somewhat frustrating being in public safety when, every day we're seeing the grandmother who takes all of her savings and mails it in a shoebox to a different state because she thinks she's bailing out her nephew out of jail, or, you have to go make the death notification to a set of parents when their daughter was just killed by a drunk driver. Like, those are the realities of our jobs every day. So it gets frustrating when it doesn't feel like we're putting the same emphasis on victims as we are to those who are victimizing people. So I think that there needs to be a better balance there. I'm not saying one's more important than the other, but there does need to be an effort to both.
That's a really good point, Jen. Is there something that we should be doing from the legislative side, from either public safety committee or policy, or?
Like the CJATI, I don't know, maybe we could start another committee meeting. I could think, I know we brought in, when COVID was going on, domestic violence, we were seeing an increase in domestic violence. There was a concern there, so we brought in the advocacy center, and then I can't remember, something else happened within that year, and it kind of got pushed off. We never talked about it again. So it's just like, having a real dedicated commitment to providing better services for victims and finding those advocacy groups and resources in the community and bringing them together and meeting on a regular basis like we do with CJATI and other groups, I think, might be a good start.
I think that's a worthy criticism. I think we need to think about how we can do a better job, and I'm open to suggestion. Thank you. Hey, anybody else? Well, again, this is hard to talk about, but I really appreciate everybody's candor. And why don't we move through our agenda and finish up our meeting? We were at the sheriff. I think Sheriff, did you have anything further for us?
Heck, no, I can't think of one more thing to say, Rich.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to talk again the rest of the evening. Thanks.
Matt, District Attorney, you have anything to share with us?
Sure, thanks, Rich. I just wanted to say that the LEAD program is now in force. It's in effect, and the team has considered several individuals. I think there's one person in it. There were a couple people that didn't make it in for various reasons, but that is something that is in the toolbox of law enforcement in the city right now, and hopefully we can spread it out to the county within the next year.
Okay. Any questions for the District Attorney? Seeing none. Department of Emergency Response.
Good afternoon. So just briefly, I wanted to share that we started an employee recognition and accommodation program this past month, and it's been well received by the staff. And I also just wanted to bring to your attention 2 events that stood out this past month. We had 2 dispatchers that I think that deserve just a little bit of attention. One of which, Pat Harris, received a 911 call from a stranded hiker and was able to ping his phone and help navigate him to a nearby road. And he was able to do that in just a few short minutes. So we're really pleased and proud of Patrick. And then secondly, Zach Giddy, one of our new supervisors, had taken a call about a stolen vehicle. It had not yet been recovered, and on his way home from work, he happened to see the vehicle in a parking lot and remembered the details and the license plate number and was able to contact the sheriff's department. So just wanted to bring those 2 dispatchers names up and recognize them tonight. Thank you.
Oh, sweet job. Thank you for sharing that with us. Okay. Any questions for emergency response? Okay, seeing none, we have Department of Probation and Community Justice. Dan?
I'd like to say what Derek said, but I guess I have a few things left over to say today. After that, I won't talk anymore. I just wanted to let folks know that day reporting is currently functioning at capacity. Which we're happy to see. We had some low utilization for a while. We kind of brainstormed about that at the department. We're back up to being full with the COVID restrictions that we have in place. So we're happy to see the program is being utilized to its capacity. Wanted to recognize our community service work project supervisors. They recently finished up working with the Friends of the Library book sale, which is an important resource for important income source for the library system of Tompkins County. They'll be transitioning over as of December 1st to Cops, Kids, and Toys. They'll be very busy from December 1st through 14th, doing collection, packaging, and distribution of toys. I wanted to let the public know that we're running out of time. I believe Sunday is the last day to sign up for Cops, Kids, and Toys. We're down. We have, as of yesterday, we had 260 applicants. We're usually up around 500. I'm sure there's plenty of need in the community, and we'd be happy to serve anyone who could use the assistance this holiday season. I wanted to let the committee know of some potential budgetary impacts to probation that are upcoming. It's currently some predatory fee legislation pending before the state, which would reduce our ability to collect DWI supervision fees locally. That money is collected and stays local. We would not be able to collect a surcharge on any restitution accounts. That would result in a loss annually of approximately $30,000 that would otherwise have stayed local. The bigger impact, there was a probation commission meeting on Tuesday. There's been a lot of talk about peace officer training and probation officer training in specific terms. The current plan seems to be adding 162 hours of peace officer training to the current 160 hours of peace officer training. which would not impact current employees, but would impact any new hires after January 1st of 2022. They would have to go to an additional month of training, which is definitely going to impact our travel and training budget, probably to the tune of nearly doubling it. So I wanted to give you a heads up that is something that's likely to happen in 2023's budget. I'll be needing to ask for additional funding.
Who's driving that, Dan?
That is the Office of Probation Correctional Alternatives, DCJS. They've been for a long time wanting to enhance the training that's offered to incoming probation staff. But essentially, what they're creating is almost an academy similar to what, a municipal police training course that police officers have to take, but it's an abbreviated version of that. But it's a significant change. I mean, it's instead of 4 weeks away before you're certified to become a probation officer, now it will be 8 to 9. So that's a big difference. It has travel, mileage impact, hotels, other associated costs that we'll have to take into consideration.
Do you think there's value that would come out of that? Would you get better probation officers?
I think ultimately it will result in really well-trained people coming out in their first year of service. I think the training is definitely needed. We can anticipate, people being more thoroughly educated early rather than the longer term of on-the-job type training that we currently provide. So it can be a good thing in the long run. It, like all good things, it will just cost money. I don't anticipate a lot of openings in the department in 2022. We may have 1, 2. I don't know if anyone was leaving at this point. So we'll see how it goes. We may be fine with our 2022 current travel and training budget. If for some reason there's a mass exodus, I may need to approach this board or the legislature for additional funds to train new people. Some of that could be avoided by, you hate to do it, but you sometimes like to do it, stealing probation officers from other departments who already completed their fundamentals of probation practice. So we do have several people from other counties that have expressed interest in coming here if we had openings, so we could always utilize that resource as well.
Thank you.
Certainly. I think that's really all. We, as far as the Cops, Kids, and Toys, we do have on January 4th at the shops at Ithaca Mall, we do have a fill the truck event for people to donate new unwrapped toys. There'll be a collection site. It will be, I'm not sure exactly where, but it will be an obvious location in the parking lot near Target.
Did you say January 4th or December 4th?
I probably said January, but I meant December.
Okay, good. All right. All right, any questions for Dan? Seeing none, Lance, you're up. Anything you want to report to us?
No, sorry, I was trying to unmute there. Yeah. No, I'll be real quick. I think nothing. We had that one informational thing in the thing, but no, nothing new dramatic here in terms of the department to report.
Okay. All right, any further business to come before the Public Safety Committee? Seeing none, I would just say I hope everybody has a very nice holiday next week, and thank you for all your work on public safety.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you all soon.